My name is Joanne Miles. I had been standing for less than 10 seconds when I realized something was wrong. The entire company was packed into the main conference hall, executives in the front row, managers lining the walls, cameras quietly recording what was supposed to be a routine leadership update. Richard Holbrook, our CEO, adjusted his cufflinks and smiled the way men do when they believe the moment belongs to them. "Today marks an important transition," he said. "Effective immediately, Maya Collins will be promoted to Operations Program Manager." Applause exploded. I didn't clap. I couldn't. That was my position, the one Richard promised me clearly, directly, in an email he sent after I pulled an 18-hour shift to save a failing rollout. "Deliver Aurora without deviation, and the role is yours." I had read that line more times than I could count. A small note for the listener. This story contains fictional details and AI-assisted narration for educational and emotional impactful purposes. If stressful workplace stories aren't what you need right now, please pause, take a break, and prioritize your well-being. Maya looked stunned as she stood. "Thank you," she said nervously. "I'm honored. I'll do my best to grow into this responsibility." Richard nodded. Proud. He shook her hand. He did not look at me. I felt heat rush to my face. Sharp and immediate. I raised my hand before I could stop myself. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice steady, "can you explain how this aligns with the leadership commitment tied to the Aurora project?" A pause. Not long, but deliberate. "This isn't the forum for that conversation, Joanne," he replied smoothly. "Strategic priorities evolve. We'll talk later." Later. Where accountability goes to die. Around me. Chairs shifted. People avoided my eyes. They knew who carried that system. They knew who fixed the failures, while Richard took credit in quarterly decks. The meeting moved on as if nothing had happened. Charts, buzzwords, applause on cue. I stayed seated, spine straight, hands folded. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't give him the reaction he expected. Instead, I smiled. And in my notebook, beneath the agenda, I wrote a single sentence, quiet, controlled, final. "So this is how you break a promise." Richard had just made his last comfortable decision. How are you feeling right now, if you can? Take a moment to prepare a glass of warm water or tea and get comfortable. It helps to listen with a calmer mind. Let me know where you're listening from today. I always enjoy reading your messages. And if stories like this speak to you, stay with me and subscribe, because what comes next is where everything quietly begins to change. I had been with the company for 15 years, and somehow that entire stretch of time was reduced to a single sentence Richard liked to use. "We appreciate your reliability." He said it whenever a project went wrong, and somehow ended right. I was the one who stepped in when vendors failed, when timelines collapsed, when clients threatened to walk. I rewrote schedules at midnight, corrected forecasts before dawn, and absorbed blame so Richard could present calm confidence the next morning. There were emails too, dozens of them, clear promises wrapped in polite corporate language. "Once this quarter closes, we'll formalize your promotion. You've earned the next step." Later, those same words were softened, rebranded as misunderstandings. "You read too much into it," Richard told me, smiling. Nothing was guaranteed. After the announcement, he pulled me aside. His voice dropped into that familiar managerial whisper. "I need you to support Maya for now," he said. "She's still learning the system." Learning was generous. She didn't know the workflows, the dependencies, or why one wrong setting could freeze an entire operation. So I explained. Again, slowly, while she took notes under a title that should have been mine. That night, I stayed late, not to fix another crisis, but to do something different. I opened old folders. I pulled archived emails. I labeled files, timelines, decisions, every handoff, every approval, every moment I had carried something that wasn't mine to carry. 15 years hadn't disappeared. They were still there. I was just done letting them stay invisible. I sat quietly, bitter but controlled, waiting for the moment silence would work for me. I didn't notice the pattern all at once. It revealed itself slowly, the way truth often does when you stop reacting and start observing. Every official process, every quarterly report, every leadership update carried Richard Holbrook's name at the top, his signature, his authority, on paper. He ran everything, but the systems told a different story. When I stepped back and looked carefully, the logs led to me. Configuration changes, approval timestamps, emergency overrides. My credentials appeared again and again, quietly embedded in the workflow. Emails showed the same trail. Richard announced decisions. I executed them. He summarized outcomes. I fixed the variables that made those outcomes possible. That realization cooled something inside me. I stopped trying to explain myself. I withdrew from the informal meetings. Richard loved those hallway briefings and late-night calls where accountability went to die. When he invited me, I replied politely and asked for written agendas. When he pushed for quick alignment, I asked for formal documentation. The room changed. The smiles thinned. "Joanne, you're being difficult," he said one afternoon, irritation slipping through his practiced tone. "We need flexibility." "No," I replied calmly. "We need clarity." That word unsettled him, without my quiet presence smoothing the edges. Small problems began to linger. Decisions waited. Questions circled back unanswered. Richard grew sharper, snapping in meetings, accusing me of disengagement. "You're not being collaborative," he said, loud enough for others to hear. I didn't argue. I kept my voice level and my calendar clean. At night, I organized, I categorized old files, archived correspondence, audit trails, version histories. Nothing altered, nothing added, just order, just truth. Arranged patiently. Then, one morning, between routine updates and vendor notices, a new subject line appeared in my inbox. Internal audit inquiry. I didn't open it right away. I finished my coffee first, steady and unhurried. When I finally read the message, it was brief and precise. A request for confirmation, a few questions about operational ownership. I leaned back, exhaled slowly, and allowed myself a small, controlled smile. I still didn't have the title, but I had trace that mattered. This paragraph explains everything you are about to hear. The message from the internal audit team arrived quietly. Without urgency or accusation, Caleb Norton introduced himself with professional restraint and asked a simple question: what was my actual role in the Aurora operations workflow? I appreciated the precision. There was no drama in his wording, only structure. I replied the same way. I described exactly what I did and what I did not do. I outlined the systems I managed, the approvals I executed, and the decisions I implemented after receiving direction. I did not editorialize. I did not defend myself. I sent documentation only when asked. Facts were enough. Richard, meanwhile, behaved as if nothing had shifted. He continued to host meetings filled with confident language and vague assurances. "Everything is stable," he told the executive team. "We're simply in a period of adjustment." He smiled when he said it, certain the ground beneath him was solid. From my desk, I watched. Maya began reaching out almost immediately. Her messages arrived late in the afternoon, hesitant and poorly phrased. "Quick question." One read, "What does this dependency warning mean?" Another followed an hour later. "Is it normal for the system to reject a change request without an error code?" I answered politely but briefly, pointing her back to the documentation Richard had insisted she review. The gaps were not my responsibility. A week passed. Caleb sent a short follow-up, thanking me for my clarity. He mentioned that my records aligned with several inconsistencies they were reviewing. I acknowledged the note and returned to my work, unbothered. For the first time in months, my days felt orderly. Then the call came from Evan Brooks, a senior representative from one of our largest clients. His voice was measured, but firm. "Joanne," he said, "we'd like to speak with you directly moving forward. You understand our operation better than anyone else there." I paused. "I'm available," I said. As I ended the call, I realized something fundamental had shifted. Richard still thought he controlled the narrative, but outside his conference room, the system was already choosing differently, without asking anyone permission. I submitted my leave request through the proper channel, 2 weeks in advance, clearly documented and approved. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't revenge. It was simply me following the same procedures I had enforced for everyone else. For years, Richard praised my reliability. Now he was about to learn what the system looked like without it. The first cracks appeared within days. A scheduled update stalled because no one knew which dependency took priority. A client review slipped by 48 hours. Then another deadline moved. My inbox stayed quiet, but the tension traveled fast. I could feel it in the hurried footsteps, the clipped voices drifting from conference rooms. Richard responded the only way he knew how. In meetings, he blamed the transition. Temporary friction. He called it growing pains. He spoke with confidence, as if repetition could replace understanding. From my perspective, it was almost impressive. Almost. Maya tried to keep up. Her messages became more frequent, less coherent. "Is this supposed to autosync? Who usually approves this? Can you just confirm one thing?" I answered when necessary. Briefly, carefully. I never overstepped. Watching someone drown in responsibilities they hadn't earned was uncomfortable. But I reminded myself that clarity mattered more than comfort. Deadlines continued to slide. One client escalated, another stopped responding altogether. Richard's tone sharpened. "Why wasn't this flagged?" he demanded in one meeting. Looking directly at me, I met his gaze. "I'm on approved leave," I said calmly. The room went silent. That silence didn't last. 2 days later, a message circulated quietly among leadership, a formal letter from one of our largest clients, addressed not to Richard, but to the board. They expressed concern about missed commitments and requested direct oversight from someone who understood the operation at a foundational level. I read the letter once, then again. The system wasn't failing. It was revealing who had actually built it. I stayed detached, noting each delay and reaction, understanding that tension exposes structure, and that when pressure rises, truth surfaces without argument, announcement, or apology from the people who mistake authority for control alone today. "If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing." Richard called me into his office the following Monday, closing the door with deliberate care. He didn't offer a seat. Instead, he leaned against his desk, arms crossed, wearing the expression he reserved for people he believed needed guidance. "Let's reset," he said. "Things have gotten tense, and that's not productive." I nodded once and waited. He shifted tone quickly. "You've always been valuable, Joanne. Maybe not in the way you expect, but in ways the company truly needs." He paused, letting the implications settle. "There could be another role for you down the line, something senior, strategic." It sounded generous until the conditions appeared. He wanted patience, silence, cooperation. "Help us stabilize," he added. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "And if I decline," I asked. His voice hardened. "Then you risk being seen as unaligned." The threat was clear. I kept my response neutral. "Please put any proposal in writing," I said. His jaw tightened. The meeting ended abruptly, that afternoon. I sent a short email thanking him for the conversation and formally declining any undefined future role. I stated my position clearly and professionally. No emotion, no accusation, just boundaries. The reply never came. Pressure followed instead. I felt the pressure clearly, but I welcomed it as confirmation that control was slipping. Lena Whitmore from HR scheduled a check-in. Her questions were careful but specific. "Can you clarify reporting ownership?" she asked. "Who approved final submissions?" I answered honestly, referencing documentation. She listened without interrupting, taking notes I couldn't see. By Wednesday, Richard's composure began to slip. He snapped in meetings, contradicted himself, corrected others unnecessarily. Once, he raised his voice and said, We all need to remember who leads this department. No one responded. Late that evening, a notification appeared in my inbox. Another audit message, this one broader. They were expanding their review beyond operations into leadership performance metrics and authored reports. I reread the message slowly. Richard had tried to close ranks, to contain the damage with persuasion and pressure. Instead, he had drawn attention exactly where he least wanted it. I didn't feel angry anymore when the requests started arriving. I felt precise. Caleb Norton asked for access logs first, then timelines, then original correspondence. I provided everything exactly as it existed. No commentary, no framing, just records. The logs showed timestamps attached to my credentials, configuration approvals, emergency overrides. The timelines matched the outages Richard claimed he had resolved. Emails filled the gaps between them, threads where instructions came from his account and execution flowed through mine. When Caleb asked for clarification, I answered with dates and file names, not opinions. Richard, meanwhile, was being called into meetings again and again, each time he returned looking thinner, sharper, as if pressure were carving away something fragile. He started sending follow-up messages late at night, just confirming. He wrote once, "You remember this the same way I do." Right? I did not reply. Numbers don't argue. They either align or they don't. The auditors noticed the same thing I had. Budget projections that shifted without authorization. Performance summaries that credited leadership decisions unsupported by data. Small inconsistencies at first, then patterns impossible to ignore. I stayed quiet and continued working. Silence. I learned. Create space for other people to speak. And once they do, they often reveal more than they intend. Near the end of the week, Caleb sent one more request. This one was different. He asked whether I had any documentation related to promotion discussions connected to the Aurora project. I paused before answering, then searched my archive. The email was still there, 6 months old, clear subject line, clear language, Richard's words, not mine. Deliver Aurora without deviation. And the role is yours. I forwarded it without comment. The satisfaction I felt wasn't joy. It was something steadier. The calm that comes when truth stands on its own. Richard had built his authority on assumptions and erased credits. The system had kept everything else. For the first time since the announcement, I slept through the night. It felt earned, inevitable, and irreversible, like gravity finally acknowledged, instead of argued with by everyone who had been watching silently. I sensed the collapse before anyone named it. Meetings stretched longer, voices sharpened, and Richard began pointing everywhere but upward. He blamed junior analysts for missed flags, project managers for poor communication, even vendors for delays he once claimed to control. Watching him scramble was unsettling, not satisfying. Power, I realized, makes some people loud when it starts slipping. The board sessions changed tone quickly. Questions grew technical. Richard answered with slogans. When asked about dependency logic, he deflected. When pressed on override protocols, he stalled. I could see it, then he didn't understand the system he supposedly led. He understood presentations, not operations. The silence around the table felt heavier than any accusation. Maya didn't last long. Her access was reduced first, quietly. Then her title was temporarily reassigned. She avoided eye contact when she passed my desk. Relief and embarrassment tangled together. I felt no triumph. She had been placed where she never belonged, and the correction was overdue. Richard, however, fought openly. He sent long emails defending his leadership, attaching selective charts, reframing failures as market pressure. He cornered people after meetings, asking for support, reminding them who signed their reviews. It was painful to watch, like someone arguing with gravity. From my seat, I stayed still. I answered when asked, clarified when necessary, and let the structure speak. Control, I learned, doesn't require volume, it requires patience. The announcement came late on a Thursday afternoon, an internal notice, brief and carefully worded. Richard Holbrook was being placed on temporary administrative leave, pending further review. No applause, no commentary, just fact. I thought about how authority is borrowed, not owned, and how systems remember everything. Watching the unraveling taught me that accountability doesn't shout. It waits. It accumulates. Then it arrives without ceremony, leaving everyone to face what they pretended not to see. The lessons settled quietly, permanent, and impossible to reverse for anyone involved thereafter. I closed my laptop and sat there quietly. The man who believed he stood above the system had finally been caught beneath it. And for the first time, the room exhaled. The decision came without drama, which felt appropriate. An official notice was sent mid-morning, concise and clinical. Richard Holbrook was terminated for falsified reporting and misappropriation of credit. No adjectives, no explanations, just a conclusion supported by evidence. I read it once, then again, feeling neither shock nor relief, only clarity. In the days that followed, people spoke more carefully, meetings shortened, emails grew precise. Accountability, once avoided, had returned to the room like furniture everyone pretended not to see. I noticed how quickly narratives collapse when facts are no longer optional. Lena from Human Resources asked to meet. She thanked me for my cooperation and then shifted. Gently. To opportunity. The company, she said, wanted stability. They were prepared to offer me the role I had been promised, revised upward to reflect scope and authority. The phrasing was respectful, almost apologetic. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I declined. The words surprised her. You don't want the promotion, she asked. I want alignment, I said. And this no longer is. It wasn't spite, it wasn't pride. It was accuracy. Returning would mean inheriting a structure that only corrected itself under collapse. I had learned something valuable, watching Richard Fall systems reveal character under pressure. And organizations reveal values when they think no one is watching. The offer remained open. She said. I thanked her and closed the conversation, walking back to my desk. I felt light, unburdened by the need to be seen as reasonable. Justice had arrived without confrontation, without raised voices or dramatic exits. It had arrived through documentation, patience, and restraint. That mattered. I packed my bag at the end of the day with deliberate calm. I wasn't walking away from a loss. I was stepping forward with certainty. Richard's silence was permanent now. Mine was chosen. Justice didn't shout. It simply finished speaking and let the truth stand alone. I understood then that power fades quickly, but integrity compounds quietly, shaping outcomes long after titles disappear and decisions no longer belong to those who abuse them. I accepted the offer on a quiet morning, without celebration or hesitation. The new company didn't speak in slogans. They spoke in authority, scope, and trust. My role came with decision rights, budget ownership, and something I had almost forgotten how to recognize: respect. Leaving felt different this time. Not like retreat, not like escape. It felt like setting something down after carrying it too long. I closed my laptop on the final day, walked out without looking back, and realized my shoulders were no longer tight. News travels fast when it matters, and disappears when it doesn't. Richard's name stopped appearing in industry emails, conference agendas, casual conversations. No announcement, no defense, just absence. Silence finished what the audit began. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. That mattered more. On my first afternoon at the new office, I sat alone for a moment before the work began. I promised myself something simple: never trade clarity for comfort again. Never accept borrowed authority when I could build my own. Richard wasn't fired because he broke a promise. He was fired because he believed promises didn't matter. I kept mine, and that made all the difference. For me, that was freedom. When I look back on everything that happened, the lesson isn't about revenge or winning. It's about noticing the moment when silence stops protecting you and starts erasing you. I remember sitting at my desk, realizing that the systems I built knew my name even when people pretended not to. That quiet awareness changed how I carried myself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I chose clarity over comfort. And that choice slowly reshaped everything around me. If you were walking beside me in this story, which moment stayed with you the most? Was there a detail you would change, or a decision you would make differently? And where are you listening from right now? If this story felt real to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to like and share it with someone who might need it. And if you'd like to stay with me for more stories like this, subscribing is a quiet way to say you're listening.